So, in a letter to some guy, Tolkien said that he dislikes Dune with intensity and refused to comment on it any further. I'd like to follow up on that with two questions. First, why did he dislike it? And second, should we actually care about him disliking it? Well, since he refused to comment in detail as to why he disliked it, we can only speculate, but here is my understanding of it. You know how you can kind of make assumptions about an author once you've read a large number of their works? As in, you can kind of tell what kind of a person he was? So, I've read most of the books in the Middle-earth canon, or at least the big names, because I'm pretty sure the nerds out there are gonna tell me that I haven't read like 150 newly found volumes of the tragic saga of Thingol Mantar, the Jackhammer Orcslayer from the 15th age or some crap like that. But I have read, and this was a long time ago, like 15 years back, I read The Lord of the Rings 3 times actually, twice in Bulgarian and once in English. I've read The Hobbit, I've read The Silmarillion, and in a separate edition, The Children of Húrin, which I think was included in a shorter version in The Silmarillion itself, so I've kind of read that one twice. And I've also read The Unfinished Tales, so yeah, I was pretty deep in the Tolkien rabbit hole at the time, and from my memories of these books, nowadays Tolkien in my head, when compared to other authors that I've read in the years since, he has become to me this author of idealistic convictions. And what do I mean by that? In Tolkien's Middle-earth, broadly speaking, evil is evil, and good is good. And you can tell those apart, most of the time even visually. As in, whatever is evil is ugly and looks disgusting. And whatever is good is also visually pleasing and beautiful and dresses in white or whatever. And that's not to say it's like that with all of his characters, because we literally have Saruman the White, whose appearance is deliberately made to be outwardly seemingly good, only to shock us more when we find out later that he is actually not white, but of many colors, meaning a two-faced and manipulative piece of trash, which actually made him complex, which is why Saruman was my favorite in the books. But anyway, you get what I'm talking about. Tolkien is idealistic in his writing in the sense that there is good and evil, and they're both generally easily discernible. Why is this idealistic? Well, because in the real world, this simply is not true. Not only is it not morally obvious whatever means good or whatever means evil, but also, if there is such a thing as good and evil, you can't tell them apart visually. Like, a psychopath in the streets doesn't look like an orc, and a person who spent their life in a leper colony helping the sick for free isn't someone who looks like freaking Galadriel. And so, there is this systematic idealism in the Middle-earth canon that is not realistic, and this just cannot be said about Dune. There is no such thing as idealism in Dune, or being able to easily tell between good and evil, even though one could argue for it in the case of the Harkonnens, but hey, that's why I keep saying I don't like the first book that much. And not only is there no idealism in Dune, but this lack of idealism is purposely pinpointed in Dune Messiah, where it turns out that our nice protagonist from the first book has turned into some kind of a galactic Hitler. And the point of the author is for us to learn that one should never have idols, and never ever trust someone is entirely perfect or anything. And because Tolkien is so black and white in his writing in comparison, I think, of course he's gonna say he hates it, because he kinda makes him look childish. I bet in his mind, it's not that he's idealistic, but he has some high heavenly sense of what kind of moral system should be implanted on young people through the use of literature, some crap like that. Him being the pompous linguistics professor that he was, you know he's gonna try and ring out some witty Socratic argument in defense of his idealism, just so he doesn't lose the argument or whatever. But given all of that, I think it's easy to understand why he would hate Dune. Dune doesn't possess his idealistic morals, and yes, as I said, I know he has some morally great characters too, like Saruman and Boromir, and that entire book, The Children of Húrin, that was pretty depressing in its display of character, but even so, most of Middle-earth is very idealistic. It's the bad, ugly orcs and trolls and Nazguls, and then it's the good little hobbits who didn't care about political power, but just wanted to plow the fields, and the nice old wizard who always wants to help everybody and saves the day, and the good King Aragorn who, as George Martin said, I'd actually want to know what his policies as king were before I ever called him a good king. Which, by the way, can you imagine if Tolkien were alive today so he can read A Song of Ice and Fire? Just think if he hated Dune, what he'd say about Martin's books. Anyway, and another reason, I think an even more obvious one as to why Tolkien didn't like Dune, was that Tolkien was a full-blown Catholic, and Dune basically trashes religion. In Dune, religion is displayed as a manipulation tool that smarter people use on dumber people, which, FYI, is the situation in real life. Well, not completely, but to a large extent. And there's probably a gazillion other reasons we can come up with for Tolkien hating Dune, but to me, what's more important is for us to ask ourselves if we should even give an F about what Tolkien thinks. Because this question, and questions similar to this, really tortured me when I was younger. The opinion of the authors and the creators, and their views that might contradict either me personally, or contradict other creators that I enjoyed. As in, yeah, I was bothered before because Tolkien, who was one of my idols, didn't like Frank Herbert's work, who was my other idol. I was also bothered during my Star Wars phase about Frank Herbert hating Star Wars. I was bothered when I read that Christopher Tolkien, Tolkien's own son, said that he hated the Peter Jackson films. Like, can you imagine that? Such brilliant, epic, one-of-a-kind film. And that pedantic old geezer has the nerve to say that they were Hollywood schlock? You just cannot imagine the vitriol that I felt for that son of a for shitting on the movies that I loved so much. And then as the years passed and my skin grew thicker, I realized that there's no reason for me to care what these people think about the art that I love, because at the end of the day, their opinions are just that, opinions. And as Frank Herbert would agree, we shouldn't treat their opinions as an authority, because they're not messiahs or anything. Don't put anyone on a pedestal, because people aren't perfect. Everyone's an idiot in their own special way, me included. And there's nothing wrong with that, as long as you acknowledge it and try to work on it.